Hello there, everybody. Welcome back to Legends Lore. So we dived into both the Star Wars Legends timeline and the Star Wars Canon timeline. And throughout my discussions on those videos, I kind of gave you guys some hints at some books to read and some of the things I recommend, but also some of the places you should start. Now, I'd mentioned many times on those videos that the best places to start are not at the beginning of the timelines if you are new to Star Wars. That is for the Star Wars hardcores that are wanting to read everything chronologically. They are very familiar with the universe, maybe even know some of the plots of some of the books, but just haven't read them. But this video, today I'm going to start another two-part series, both for canon and legends. I'm going to give you the 10 books I recommend to start reading Star Wars canon. I've divided these into 3 separate areas of your Star Wars reading level knowledge. So let's dive into those books that if you are completely new to Star Wars, maybe you've seen one movie, maybe you've seen no movies, maybe you've just seen an episode of a TV show, maybe you just think the concept is cool and you want to read Star Wars. These 2 books you can read without having any knowledge of the universe at all. So we're going to start off with Lost Stars by Claudia Gray. This is a young adult novel that came out in 2015. Lost Stars tells the story of Thane Kyrell and Sienna Ree, 2 people from very different backgrounds who bond over their shared love of flying. Ultimately, both of them enroll in the Imperial Academy, and their paths are set from there, choosing to be a part of different parts of the Galactic Civil War. It's a Romeo and Juliet style love story between these 2 characters with Star Wars as its background, but it is a lot more than that, and the story is really, really good. I think if you are interested in getting into Star Wars, especially into the wide world of canon YA novels, Lost Stars is a great place to start if you have no prior Star Wars knowledge. It also does take place during episodes 4, 5, and 6, and even after episode 6, so if a lot of those plot points intrigue you, and you read things in the book that you're like, oh, that sounds cool, I might want to check that out in the films, it might encourage you to go back and check out the rest of the films. The other book that I think you can read with no prior knowledge of Star Wars is Light of the Jedi, the first High Republic book in the High Republic Phase 1. If you see my canon timeline, you might think, well, doesn't Convergence start the top of the timeline? And yes, it does, but I do not recommend getting into Phase 2 without having read Phase 1, and the best way to get into Phase 1 is to start with its first novel, and that is Light of the Jedi, written by Charles Soule. Light of the Jedi introduces many of our main Jedi throughout the entire initiative, as well as our main villains, the Nile, and their leader Marchion Ro. It's one of my favorite Star Wars canon books of all time too, so it's not just great for beginners, it is just a fantastic Star Wars book in general. And it's nice that we have both a great entry point if you are somebody looking into adult novels and a great entry point for those of you looking into YA. But if you get into Light of the Jedi first, it does open a whole new avenue and a lot of different doors for you to get into Star Wars books, because then you can just continue down the entirety of the High Republic Phase 1 timeline, and then jump on over to Phase 2 when you're done with that. So let's move on to those of you, probably many of you watching this, who are in a bit higher Star Wars reading level. You are very familiar with the films. Maybe you've always loved Star Wars films and you just have no idea where to start reading. And I don't blame you. There are so many novels, both in canon and legends, that it's really hard to narrow down what's a part of a certain trilogy. What characters do you need to know here? Do you need to read this to be introduced to a character there? I'm going to give you here 5 novels that I think you can start by just knowing the films and the basic characters from the films. These aren't in any particular order, but I'm going to start off here with Master and Apprentice. Master and Apprentice is a book that takes place before The Phantom Menace about Qui-Gon Jinn and his apprentice Obi-Wan Kenobi. So really, if you've just seen The Phantom Menace, then you can read this book. It deals with a lot of what Qui-Gon is going through in The Phantom Menace. It talks a lot about his journey towards becoming a Jedi Master, his rise through the ranks of the Jedi Order, and his frustration with how the rest of the Jedi see the world very differently from him. We also get to hear him talk a lot about his former master, Count Dooku, and we get to see some flashbacks to that as well as his relationship with Dooku's first apprentice, Rael Averross, a new character that was introduced in this novel. But amongst all, we do get a strong connection between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, and that is something that's very rewarding if you've seen the film and you love Phantom Menace. The plot is solid, but it really is the character development that you're going through here. This is written by Claudia Gray again, so it's another fantastic book from her and a great starting point if you're into prequel era Star Wars stories. Another prequel era Star Wars story I think you can read if you've just seen the films is Brotherhood by Mike Chen. Brotherhood just came out last year and immediately rose in the ranks of my favorite canon novels. Again, this is a character-centric book, and it's predominantly about Obi-Wan and Anakin and their evolving relationship, as the title would dictate. It begins with Anakin having just graduated from Apprentice to Jedi Knight, night. And the whole book is really about how Anakin and Obi-Wan are adjusting their worldviews to seeing each other more as brothers rather than as master and apprentice. There's a line in Attack of the Clones where Anakin refers to Obi-Wan as his father, but then if you look at Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan refers to Anakin as his brother. So there's an evolution of that relationship there that you might not have really thought about if you just watched the films, but this book does a really nice job of connecting both. Also, if you're a Clone Wars fan on top of that, this is kind of the prequel story to the Clone Wars TV show. You don't need to have seen the Clone Wars TV show to read this, but if you are a Clone Wars fan, you will get some nice nuggets of information from that as well. The next story I'm going to recommend takes place during the Clone Wars, but then pushes past Revenge of the Sith into the Dark Times, and that is Catalyst, a Rogue One novel. It seems across Disney's reign on Star Wars that Rogue One has become one of the most beloved Star Wars films that they've made, and especially the most beloved of their spin-offs, the Star Wars storyline of Star Wars movies. If you're also into Andor, you might be interested in learning more about the early Rogue One era, the stuff that sets up Rogue One. This book is an absolutely perfect prequel to that story. Catalyst deals a lot with characters who you don't even need to have seen the films to know. When I first read this, Rogue One had not come out, so I didn't know the characters of director Orson Krennic. I didn't know Galen and Lyra Erso. These are the characters that if you've seen Rogue One, you might know who they are. Even if you've seen Rogue One, you might not know Galen and Lyra right off the top of your head. Jyn Erso's parents, the main character of our film. But it's the story of how they become embroiled in the Death Star conflict, also the political machinations of rising up through the ranks of the Empire, and why director Krennic is so at odds with Grand Moff Tarkin, who is also a big character in this novel. This is written by James Luceno, so it can be a little text-heavy and dense. He writes in a very descriptive and sometimes wordy style, but if you're really into Star Wars, you'll appreciate the detail here. He is extremely detailed. And it gives you a lot of answers for things that have happened in the start of the Clone Wars, like when we see Dooku with the Death Star plans in Attack of the Clones. There's a nice transition point from that all the way to where we get to that opening scene of Rogue One that takes place when Jyn is a child. It's a great prequel to Rogue One, and if you like that film, you're going to love this book. We're going to jump all the way into the sequel era for these next two recommendations. Both of them take place before the sequels start, but I think both of them very much so enhance your enjoyment of the sequels. We'll start with the one earlier in the timeline, and that is Shadow of the Sith by Adam Christopher. Shadow of the Sith is a novel mainly featuring Luke Skywalker and Lando Calrissian, as well as Rey's parents Dathan and Miramir. This is the first time they are named, as well as the really only story we've gotten about them, so it adds a lot to the character of Rey and kind of her overall destiny throughout of it. This book really gives us a lot of concrete information on how Palpatine's plot is maneuvering through the galaxy, what it's like on Exegol, some of Palpatine's operatives that are moving throughout the galaxy, and some of Luke's early awareness of how the galaxy is starting to change and kind of the darkness falling on the world. We also get Lando here, whose daughter was recently kidnapped, and he's desperately looking for her. It's a side of Lando we don't normally get. It's a very sad, somber, and kind of melancholy Lando. This is a book full of information and pushes the story across the entire galaxy along very far. But again, if you've just seen the sequel trilogy or you've seen The Rise of Skywalker a few times, you can definitely read this with no problem, and it will add a lot to your movie experience. The last book I'm going to recommend is the one that takes place latest in the timeline, and that's why I put it here, but it's one of my favorite Star Wars books of all time, and that is Bloodline. This is the third book on this list, written by Claudia Gray, and it's one of her best books, if not her best book, in my opinion. This follows Leia as she maneuvers the New Republic Senate, and she deals with the galaxy now finding out that she is the daughter of Darth Vader. There's also the looming threat of the First Order, which Leia is trying to see if it is truly a threat to the galaxy, while other senators are calling her a warmongerer for being afraid of it. It does nicely enhance where the state of the galaxy is in The Force Awakens, the political divide that's between senators in the New Republic, and why the New Republic is caught so unawares of the First Order. Also, the main differences between the Resistance and the New Republic, because I get that question asked to me all the time, and I think it is very confusing in the sequels. Overall, I think this is just a fantastic novel, and if you are interested in the sequels, more particularly the beginning of the sequels like The Force Awakens, this is probably the best prequel novel you could read to that story. All right, so the final three things I'm going to recommend, I kind of recommend you at least have seen the films and Star Wars, The Clone Wars, and or Star Wars Rebels. I'll be specific on which shows you kind of needed to see to read these, but these books I think you can read if you just have a general sense of those shows. Maybe you've just seen them once. The first one I'll start off with is Dooku Jedi Lost. So I wanted to include an audio drama on here because we've had a few of them across canon, and it seems to be a format that canon is really excited to experiment with. And we've had some pretty good ones. I think Dooku Jedi Lost is the best one so far. The main plot of the story follows Asajj Ventress as she's going through some of Dooku's old journals. We get to learn all of Dooku's backstory, and I think this is great when paired with Tales of the Jedi. Now, the only reason I recommend you see Clone Wars, at least a little bit of it, to read this is because Asajj Ventress is our main character. A lot of the weight of her part of the story you can't really get unless you know a little bit of it by seeing the Clone Wars. So I definitely recommend you at least see a few of the Asajj Ventress episodes of the Clone Wars before listening or reading this in script form. Next is also a book that I recommend you know Asajj Ventress for, and that is Dark Disciple. Dark Disciple was originally 8 episodes of Star Wars The Clone Wars written by Katie Lucas. The novel has been adapted by Christy Golden. Dark Disciple follows Asajj Ventress and the Jedi Quinlan Vos, who is also featured in the Clone Wars show, as they team up to try to assassinate Count Dooku. This is a mission that's actually sanctioned by the Jedi Council, and it is a last-ditch desperate attempt to end the war. This does take place towards the end of the Clone Wars. You can read this if you haven't read the Clone Wars, but I think you'll get a heck of a lot more out of it if you know Asajj Ventress's story. This is one of my favorite Star Wars books of all time, though, so I definitely recommend you read it if you have seen the show. And the last one I'm going to recommend, and it is a good jumping on point for this character in canon, and that is 2017's Thrawn by Timothy Zahn. You might say, well, why do you need to have seen a show for Thrawn? I recommend you see Star Wars Rebels because this version of Thrawn ties directly into the show. The novel was dropped during and towards the end of season 3 of Star Wars Rebels when Thrawn was announced to be in the show. I would say this one rides the bubble between my recommendations that absolutely need you to have seen a show and those that just need you to have seen the films. This does follow Thrawn's journey all the way from when the Empire discovers him throughout the Imperial Academy and up to Star Wars Rebels. And in that sense, it's a great book, and it does lay a lot of the foundation for the mythology for Thrawn and Thrawn's universe and all the Chiss Ascendancy stuff and the Grisks and all these things that Zahn has created in canon. This lays the foundation for all of it, so it is the first Thrawn book I definitely recommend you read. But at the same time, I think if you want to get the full maximum enjoyment out of this, if you've seen Star Wars Rebels, at least Star Wars Rebels Season 3, I think you'll get a bit more out of it. So that's my list of the 10 books. Again, none of them are in direct order, but they are in those categories. Let me know what you think, or if you have any recommendations for other people, put them down in the comments. If you found this video helpful, please hit that like button. That would really help me out. Keep an eye out on my channel for more Star Wars book content. If you like Star Wars books, please subscribe. I'm going to have a ton more Star Wars book content and some book recommendations for reading Legends out soon. Also, if you're interested in more Star Wars stuff, I have another channel called Star Wars Labs. We're reviewing The Mandalorian and The Bad Batch right now. We also do book reviews. We just reviewed Jedi Battle Scars, the newest canon book that just came out. You might want to check out our review over on that channel. Make sure you're subscribed to both channels if you are interested in Star Wars books. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.